All right, guys, so today we are going to discuss a video that Jeffrey Verity Schofield sent me with Greg Doucette talking with Mike Israetel. And the topic was whether or not everybody with enough time could bench 300, squat 400, and deadlift 500. And I have to say, I really liked this video. I did not think I would be in such agreement with Greg Doucette. I know there's a lot of controversy behind Greg Doucette and what he says and claims and things like that. But one thing that I would say I consistently seem to agree with him about is the influence of genetics. He says, yes, I did take steroids, or this person takes steroids, but genetics is such a huge factor. And so we're gonna get into how that would play into these strength standards here.
So you're natural here. So not enhanced. Can all healthy males, if they dedicate their lives, like they train perfectly, they have a coach, they do everything 100%, they train their ass off, bench 300, squat 400, and deadlift 500?
No.
And why not?
So all human traits, generally, or almost all, are what we call in science normally distributed, which means there's like a bell curve, right? And that means most people are capable of, on average, like if they push themselves a certain thing, and it means that fewer and fewer and fewer people are capable of really insane shit. And then fewer and fewer people are capable of very not impressive things. But those fewer people exist. And there's numerically, like statistically, there's not a lot. Like, let's say the bottom 10% of genetic responders to weight training. Okay, it's only 10%, right? 90% of people are better. 10% of the world's healthy males, that's fucking millions of people.
Right.
It's like maybe like 50,000 of your YouTube subscribers are in that bottom 10% of responders to weight training.
So I'm not surprised to hear Mike bring up this point. Mike is analytically minded, he's an intelligent guy. And so it makes sense that he would look at this statistically. And this is something that I brought up on one or two podcasts before. And I think it's really important to drive home, right? So if you look at a normal distribution, right, a Gaussian curve, and you're all used to seeing that graph, right? We talk about what is the average bodybuilder. And in general, and this is actually something I thought about when Chris Barakat was on recently, because he said he thinks he's really average. If you talk to maybe an Alberto Nunez and in that camp, they'll say, what's like your standard average natural bodybuilder? 5'9", 5'10", 160, 165 pounds on stage. That's typically what you see. I think Alberto Nunez is about 5'9". He used to compete at 155, I think closer to 160 now. Brad Loomis, similar height. He competed at 155. Eric Helms, he's closer to 6'1", so if you normalize his weight down to being, let's say if he was 5'9" or 5'10", instead of competing at 180, he probably would compete closer to like 180 or 160 to 165. So you see that often, and keep in mind, these weights and these people that I'm using, other than me, I'd say Brad Loomis probably is closer to your average, but somebody like Alberto Nunez talks about when he started lifting, he blew past all of his friends. i.e., he's not average, right? It's pretty obvious looking at him that he's a natural pro. He's not average. I would say Eric Helms is not average, right? I would say he is above average. Not dramatically above average, but certainly above average. So if you consider that is average, let's just give it the benefit of the doubt, 5'10", 160 pounds peeled, right? And again, just as another example, you look at somebody like a Steve Hall, after 10 years of lifting, he was 5'10", competing at about 165 peeled. And he's very impressive, right? Most people would say he's definitely above average for your natural bodybuilder, not in terms of genetic structure and shape. I think he's talked about how maybe he doesn't have the best shape for bodybuilding, but in terms of muscle mass, I think it's pretty good. So if you actually look at that and then you consider a normal distribution, we have rarely seen some guys who most would consider natural, or a lot of people would consider natural, who are around 5'10", and let's say 185 pounds on stage. Like, that exists. It's usually not going to be the case. It's very rare, but we see it at natural shows. If you believe Lane Norton is natural, he's 5'10", and he competed at 195. And I'm very glad to see that when he talks to people now, I think he talked with Greg Doucette actually about this. Greg Doucette said, you have to have good genetics to do this. And Lane said, yes, good genetics and extreme work ethic. And I think Lane, like a lot of very hard workers, have a hard time giving credit to anything besides their hard work, because they're usually the hardest working person in the room. But, obviously in the case of Lane, a world record squat at some point, and again, 5'10", 195 on stage is is so far beyond what you typically see, right? And even if you want to say, oh, he's got more bone mass, and he's a wider frame, let's just take that weight. That alone is fine. So peeled 195, right? So again, we're looking at a normal distribution. So if we're saying average is 160 and somebody is competing at 5'10", 190, genuinely natural, then guess what? Almost by definition, somebody out there could train as long as these guys have, 10, 15, 20 years in the gym, their whole life dedicated to it, and be 5'10" and diet down to a peeled 130 to 140. And that sounds crazy because that's not what you see. At almost no natural bodybuilding shows will you ever see that. In most gyms, anybody who's been training that seriously, you won't see that. But again, by definition, that person exists. That person who would dedicate their whole life to it could be a shredded 135 pounds on stage. And why don't you see that? Because people gravitate towards what they're good at. If you are in the gym and you're getting compliments and you're growing, you're gonna stick with it. If you've been killing yourself and you're still only 5-10 pounds more muscle after years and years and years, you might just not do it unless it's something that you're just going to do as a general health endeavor. It's unlikely that you're going to stay with that, right? That's why people gravitate, if you're super unathletic, you might gravitate more towards, like the standard stereotypical nerdy things, right? Maybe you're going to be more of a student instead of an athlete. And obviously, as I think Mike's about to talk about, we'll hear how he talks about some people are great at a lot of things. You see that too, right? We all want to think that, hey, everybody has something that they're absolutely amazing at, but the reality is some people are really good at a lot of things and some people are good at almost nothing, unfortunately, right? And you should probably, try to find some other things that you're good at. And most people are going to have something that they can be quite good at, but it's important to keep in mind that those people on the other end of the bell curve do exist.
And that means that they are capable maximum without just gearing them out to the fucking moon and get them on Derek more plates, more dates.com or some shit like that. Just short of that, they are going to be really limited in how big and strong they can get. I have coached and seen individuals at the prime of their life, mid-20s, having trained for 5 years, whose maximum bench is like 105 pounds for a set of 10. And I'm doing all my sports science bullshit on them, and they're maybe gaining 5 pounds on their bench every 6 months to a year.
Right.
I mean, where are you going to get a 300-pound bench out of that? The sheer math just doesn't add up.
Yeah.
And that's a real fucking person. Those people exist. And that's numerically a lot of people. I think if you scale those numbers you gave me down by 100 pounds on each lift, most people can do that.
Yeah,
Most
that's my
adult men
point.
can do it.
Soon as you say all, it's not all.
Correct.
It's not all. I mean, I could say like it could be half those numbers, not all can do it. But if we switch it to something like, because I first read it, can most? And I'm like, no, most can't. Most can't. They're going to say, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people like a 400-pound squat took me a long time to get to. And I'm telling, people say I'm bragging. I have above average genetics for strength. I mean, like I have a world record. It's hard for me to have done it. So then
Okay, so I'm glad again that they distinguish between everybody versus what is average and what is common for most people. So if what I just ranted about discourages you, just realize that statistically speaking, it's unlikely that you're in that camp, right? Most people are going to be able to build a relatively impressive physique. Most people are going to get to relatively good strength levels if it's something that you're consistent with, right? However, I'm just saying that you can't necessarily base your opinion of somebody's knowledge on that because genetics are such a powerful factor. And Menno and Mike here have also talked together and individually about oftentimes the best athletes are just the people with the best genetics and they're not necessarily working harder than anybody else. I remember if you know Jordan Burroughs, one of the best wrestlers ever, he has talked about how he's like, I'll be in the room with other people and they are trying as hard as I am and they will just never be as good as I am. And he's still talking about people who still have great genetics, right? These are Olympic level trainees, but they're just not going to be up to that speed. So there's people who are far, far, far worse than that. Right? But again, statistically speaking, that's probably not you. Right now, you're also probably not the person at the top end. If you are, you're probably not watching this channel. But most of you listening, especially if you've been lifting for a while, you've stuck with it. Again, you probably have had a reasonable response to training, and you can expect to be reasonably impressive.
So then we further exaggerate this to this. It's been stated that to achieve elite level standards in powerlifting, most people can do that natural. And I said, by definition, it's an elite standard that's there because most cannot do it. And there's been tons of videos made about this. And I disagree. And they're talking that it's all about I'm wrong. And it's because they don't want to believe that there's such a strong genetic component. They want to think that, no, if you're not bench, and just so you know, the elite standard, 181 pounds in the bench press is 345. So 181 and under weight class, 345. They're saying most people could do that. And I listed my brother, editor Steve, who's a bodybuilding and powerlifting champion, couldn't do it. And Will Tennyson, who's a Gymshark sponsored athlete, but trains really hard, couldn't do it. And I'm like, to say that most people can do it, to me, it's shocking. And it's like, they think I'm shitting on people that I'm just saying, well, I'm crushing dreams, that you just can't do it. And they'll use themselves as an example and say, well, I'm under 180 and I have shitty genetics and I did it. And I'm like, you have great genetics, but they don't want to admit that. People just can't seem to thank their genetics.
So, and again, it's interesting because as I watched this, I was like, I really didn't think that I would agree so much with Greg, but I completely agree. You see this so commonly. I mean, I've been on bodybuilding forums since I was 12 years old, and the number of people who say they have average genetics is just, it will never cease to amaze me. It is just shocking. There is this guy, I'm blanking on the name, Hispanic guy, short pro bodybuilder. I mean, literally like 5'5", 185 pounds peeled, enhanced, but would be going up to like 205. And he was like a pro for a while, winning shows. And he would say, I have average genetics. I just train really hard. And it's like, it's truly shocking because they actually believe it. Like, they're not just, BSing. These people actually believe it because it's what they surround themselves with. It's what they're around. So they see themselves, they're not the top of the top. So they just consider themselves average. And sometimes I even think about that with my genetics. How would I rate my genetics? Because, that was one of the things Jeffrey Verity Schofield asked me. He's like, how would I rate his? And I kind of went into an analysis of that. But something that I had talked about is like, it's always, because I noticed myself also wanted to just say, well, probably average, right? Because it's just so normal. And I'm sure I would fall, if you had like a percentile, I'm probably somewhere between 40th and 60th percentile. I would say for strength potential, maybe somewhere in the 60th percentile. I've mentioned before, I had a triple body weight deadlift by the time I was 20. I don't think everybody can necessarily get to where I've gotten with some lifts. Like, he mentioned elite standards for bench, 181 pounds. Benching, I think he said 345 or so. I was benching in the mid 300s at about 195. I think I had done a clean 335, a really sloppy 365. I call it like a 350, but the point is, like, not everybody could do that. And that's with very long limbs. So I'd say my strength potential is reasonable, but on YouTube and the internet, people would blow past me and it would be super easy. For bodybuilding, I would say overall muscle mass, maybe average genetics. And then as far as like bodybuilding shape and insertions and things like that, I would say below average. I think if you take like the muscular measurements that I have, there are a lot of people who, look much more impressive. Maybe they have shorter limbs or better distribution of body fat, things like that. So, but, even then you can see that I kind of have this bias towards thinking, well, about average, and it depends on who you're surrounding yourself with. But I think he's totally spot on in terms of saying that the average person who is elite wants to think that it's their hard work. And I can understand that because, as I mentioned with Lane as an example, he clearly has fantastic genetics for bodybuilding and especially powerlifting. But when you look at that and you see how hard the guy has worked, they don't want anybody taking away from that, right? And you see the same thing with people who are using performance enhancing drugs too. Why they don't want to talk about it, it's like, well, you're going to take away from all the hard work. And to be honest, sometimes they're not working that hard. Sometimes they're not working nearly as hard as they think they are. But sometimes they are, and I can understand the hesitation to kind of, admit that or say it's anything besides their hard work.
Like the fact that you're well over 200 pounds of muscle, obviously your genetics are pretty damn good to build muscle. You wouldn't be where you are right now if you weren't. Same as intelligence. You have a PhD. You're a smart guy. You don't get that without some kind of genetics. Obviously, you studied hard, you worked hard, you did all the right things, but there's a genetic component that allowed you to do that, which I believe is the same thing in lifting weights.
All right, so we don't have to dive into that pretty controversial topic, but if you want to get disheartened, you can go ahead and look up the literature on IQ and genetics and how much genetics play a role there and how hard it is to actually change IQ. Probably more than muscle mass.
I can't agree with you more. I would say even the opposite statement is more true. If you say most people at 181 pounds will never be able to bench 345 plus, I would absolutely agree to that.
Yeah, I said as a stat, I said, I mean, if 1 in 10 can, I would say it's 1 in 100. Like if I had to just guess, like I'm saying, if I was coaching them or the best coach in the world's training them, they give them 20 years to do it and they're natural 181 pounds. That is it's elite standard for a reason. I mean, think of all the people who compete in powerlifting. It's mostly people who are good at lifting weights. So you're already getting to a smaller sample size of people who are actually genetically pretty good at that. If they weren't, they'd probably be running marathons or something different, So people who compete in lifting weights are usually strong people to start with, and not many of them can do it. So how could they say, it's shocking that people think I'm wrong, but I think that it's just that people don't want to be told the hard truth. They want to know, like I always say, tell them what they want to hear, not what they need to hear. I tell you what you need to hear. You need to hear this. If you bench 300 at 180, that's freaking amazing. And if you get to 345, that's a combination of genetics and hard work.
Oh yeah. I think a lot of people that say stuff like that have some combination of like understandable, like hopefulness. Like you want to say shit that makes everyone feel nice. Like, yeah, I wish everyone else was all capable of the same shit. It's just not true. And another thing is I think a lot of those folks haven't really been a coach or trainer to normal populations before. Because if you watch enough YouTube videos and have enough Instagram feed, you just think like everyone can be Larry Wheels if they try hard enough. Because like you got like 5 Larry Wheels on your feed. It's fucking everyone's like that, right? But then you actually go train normal population, like the co-founder of Renaissance Periodization. Check out our YouTube channel, by the way, shameless plug. Co-founder Nick Shaw and I, we were trainers at a very high level gym in New York City back in the day. And we trained like the people that like ran the finance departments of various huge banks, there's all multimillionaires and shit. And these are the kind of the people that were probably like average / nerds when they were in high school. Like, the kids that weren't like jocks or sports people. And I tell you what, like we had a whole gym of these guys, great people, dedicated. Like these aren't the motherfuckers that skip workouts. Like they're just good at everything they do. Dedication is never a problem. These guys, if you benched 185 at all, never mind for reps, you were in the top 5% strongest people at that gym. If you could handle a plate on a slide in the bench for reps, people turned and looked and they're like, damn, you're doing real well, Tom. He was like, thanks, guys. It took me a while to get here. Like a 225 plus deadlift to reps was some shit that was pretty impressive. I've trained plenty of adult men who have to train for a few months to be able to work with 135 on the deadlift. That's some real shit. Like those are real people and they're out there. And remember, automatically, the gym population is already self-selected for people that are pretty fucking good at the gym. And then your Instagram is a tiny subset of that population, which are really fucking good at the shit. Like my genetics for bench pressing, for example, I never bench pressed. I was like 120 pounds. All I did was deficit push-ups and just various kinds of push-ups over one summer in my freshman to sophomore year. And then I benched 175 at 120 pounds. And it was like, okay,
yeah, that's a big bench. Yeah.
Like, and I remember telling other wrestlers, like, I bench 175, and they're like, holy shit. Like, even that's impressive when you weigh 120, right? And then eventually I benched like 370 at 181 raw. And like, I got like a federation record for that shit. Like that was high. Like when I would do that at the university gym at Michigan, when I had like 3 plates, like you could have a 180-pound kid with 3 plates and change, and he's doing reps. Everyone stops what they're doing and looks.
Exactly.
Like that's rare. And it's rare for fucking reason. Because most people, even when they dedicate themselves to it, like the strong people in college may be able to do reps of 225 on the bench. Like if you can rep 225 on the bench by human global standards, you're a strong motherfucker. Like you're on a plane at a tank top, grandma sitting next to you is going to be like, whoa, you're an athlete, right? Like if
So, I don't want his comments about people, really having to take a really long time to work up to a 135 bench or a 225 deadlift to discourage people. Again, we're talking averages here and the norm is almost everybody is going to be able to do those numbers, right? I mean, there's a huge stretch from saying, can everybody bench 135 to bench 300 pounds? For almost anybody listening to this, you're going to hit those numbers relatively quickly, right? But I think that his point is sound that those people exist. They do exist. And you know, it's going to be a rarity, but the person that you see in your gym is, or the average person you see in your gym is already going to self-select, as he says, to be somebody who has a little bit better genetics, right? And again, as I even make this video, I can feel that I would say, if somebody said, what are your strength genetics? There's just this inclination to say, oh, just average. But like, oh my God, I've had to try so hard. And I have. And anybody who watches the channel knows that I have tried everything under the sun. But it is also true that when I am repping out 200 plus pounds on overhead press, people in the gym will mention it, you know, they'll say, wow, man, really strong. Like, that is not something that you tend to see too much in a regular gym, right? Obviously, you go to a powerlifting gym and it's literally nothing, right? But then I'd have to step back and say, yeah, you know, maybe I do have above average genetics for strength. And like I said, that would be different than for bodybuilding and the structure and all that stuff. So anyway, guys, they finish up with a few more comments on this, but a lot of the same theme. So I just wanted to say I was shocked at how much I agree with Greg Doucette here. There's a number of times I've agreed with him. I just think some of the things he says are, you know, a little ridiculous at times. But this, I completely agree with this video. I'd be really interested to hear what you guys think as far as what you experience in your gym if you just go to a regular gym. I know when talking to Abel Chabai, he would talk about how in his gym, he's actually one of the most impressive people there. And I've wondered if that was due to his location, whereas like in America, near a city, honestly, like I'll go into a gym and there are some pretty big people, some clearly enhanced people, you know, some impressive people for sure. I am not remotely the biggest or strongest guy in my gym. And I've been to some gyms where they're just complete freaks. So I'd be interested to hear what your experience there is and what you think of this video. What do you think that normal strength standards would be? Again, Abel Chabai made a great video on like what he considers normal. If I were just to say off the top of my head what I think almost anybody who's just a healthy male could achieve, literally with like no forethought at all, I would say, you know, most people could probably get up to a 225 bench. Most people could probably, like I would basically step it down one. A 225 bench, a 315 squat, a 4 or 5 dead. Most people, again, most would be able to achieve that in a reasonable amount of time with dedicated training. But some people will do that in their first year and some people will never do it. So that's the video, guys. If you like this reaction type of video, let me know. Comment down below for the algorithm, like the video, and subscribe for more like this.